Man, that's fun. Welcome back to 13C. Brand new, the TS12 Tavor shotgun from IWI. Now this is brand new, basically just took it right out of the box, rushed out here with the camera. It's a little late in the afternoon, but we're gonna put our first rounds through it right now. If I've loaded this up properly and I rotate the tube properly, we should have buckshot, followed by number 4 shot, followed by 7 1/4 shot. So without further ado, let's make it rain. You push in the, there's a lever right here, you push, you rotate it. Once the tube gets into position, it automatically chambers the next shell, if there is a shell in the tube. And that was the 4 shot. I'm looking at the husks down on the ground. So buckshot came out first. That was the 4 shot. Now the real test here, and we'll see since she's so new how she does. The 7 1/4 bird shot. This is what makes or breaks on a lot of semi-auto shotguns. Let's see. Check that out. All right. So now that I got the first shots on camera, I'm actually going to play around and mess around with this thing. We'll get a lot of that footage on camera and whatnot. But generally speaking, what I like to do for any new gun that comes in, especially a new release, is make sure we get those very first rounds on camera. Anyway, there's a lot of features to go over on this and to check out. This thing initially we started out with on the low setting, low gas setting. So we shall see. For low brass, I suppose is probably the better terminology for it. We'll move it over to the high and see if that'll cycle that buckshot and see if it'll still cycle reliably. I would assume moving it over to the high it won't run on the low brass stuff. But we'll see. We're going to play around with this over the next couple of weeks before this video comes out. You guys obviously all see it in one full video here, so stick around. If you haven't subscribed already, do that. We're going to have a video out on this newer dot here, the P-Tactical Super Dot from Nikon, as well as a lot more stuff coming up in the future. So subscribe if you haven't already, hit that notification bell, and let's get into the rest of this video. Welcome back to 13C. On deck today, the brand new Tavor TS12 shotgun. We've had this shotgun in for T&E from IWI now for about 2 weeks, running it through its paces in a variety of loads. First off, as the name would imply, the 12 and TS12 does indicate this is a 12 gauge shotgun. Semi-automatic, and it has a capacity of either 15+1 or 12+1 shells in here. That's accomplished via this rotating drum in the front here, and you can rotate it either direction to access either of the 3 tubes that are in here. Each of those tubes will hold either 4 rounds of 3-inch shells or 5 rounds of 2 3/4-inch shells. It also has an adjustable gas setting right up front here that you can adjust pretty quickly and easily on the fly, so that you can adjust to be able to shoot some of the lighter loads as well as heavier 3-inch Magnum rounds. So you can basically put anything in this, from the stoutest 12 gauge round you can find all the way down, and for our testing indicates this thing is even going to run 7.5-inch bird shot. So we'll get into some of that in just a little bit, but what I want to do is address the 800-pound elephant in the room. Pictures, when you look at this thing in pictures and even on video, this thing looks big. This is not a small gun by any means. And I want to quantify size-wise, because pictures really don't, hear me holding it doesn't do it justice. This is not, it's a big gun, but it's not as massive as it would appear. It's almost an optical illusion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a picture in here of this with my the Tavor SAR that I bought probably 8 years ago when it very first came out. Love that gun, had a ton of fun with it. It's a shame IWI discontinued it, but if you like those kinds of Tavors, they still make the X95 now, and that was its next iteration and replaced it. In any event, you can tell by that picture it's not that big when you actually start looking at it. Some of this is an optical illusion. It's not small by any means. It is big. It comes in at right about 9 pounds, but keep in mind this is a shotgun that's meant to shoot Magnum 3-inch rounds. This is meant to handle all kinds of heavy abuse and workload on it. So that's one of the reasons why its size it is, and obviously being able to accommodate 12 gauge round in here like it is, load it and do what it does. These lines here are they're a little deceptive. When you start looking at this thing from the back, you realize it's not quite as big when you get it in your hands and you hold it as it first appears. So I wanted to kind of cross that barrier, because it's a kind of sci-fi-ish looking gun and it looks really big, but it's not as big as you would think. Once you actually get it in your hands, you start using it and getting accustomed to it. I will say the biggest, pardon the pun, the biggest thing on this is actually going to be the height difference here, as far as in this plane. This is where it's actually the biggest, but then again, you're having to accommodate those 12 gauge rounds and as this thing functions. So let's talk about that a little bit. Like I said, semi-automatic. You've got an adjustable gas in the front here for heavy and light loads. That's accomplished by, you can adjust it using, you know, whatever, but the easiest thing to do is just take the charging handle, give it a solid pull, it'll pop out of place, and then you can insert it from either side right into this notch, and then adjust it and move it up and down into either the heavy or light load position. And then you just reinsert your pin, actually on either side, if you want to change the location of that thing, smack it in and it's backed in and locked in place. I haven't had any issue with this thing pulling out or yanking out, using it, cycling it, anything like that. This does lock back open. It locks back open on the last round in each tube, and then as you rotate the tube, if you rotate the tube and there's a shell in it, it will automatically chamber the next round out of the next tube, which is really nice. If you notice, I'm moving it back and forth here freely. It's not locking forward. In order to lock it back, there's this little guy right here. Push this forward, listen. Now, the next time I pull it back, it'll lock itself back. To drop that back home, your release is right there. Feeding wise, you can feed shells into this from either side, either this side or the other side. And there's a little post here so that when you thumb your shell in, if it slips your hand and it comes back, it'll catch on that post and it won't just flop out onto the ground, usually. If you want to release rounds out of the tube, little button right here, and there's another one on the other side, push it, it'll let the round pop out, and it'll actually get caught right on that tab so it doesn't dump out on the ground. You can pull it out. You can also load this by dropping shells directly into the chamber and then letting the bolt go home. As far as rotating this in between shooting, you can rotate it in either direction, whichever one you want, and that's accomplished by pushing this release right here in front of the trigger. I'll let you get a good look at that right there. I find, for me, and if you're going to be right-handed, this is what I would suggest. At least I've tried a number of different ways working with this, and this is what I would suggest until someone else comes up with a better way to do it. And I'm sure there'll be trainers out there who develop good manual arms for this. But for now, shooting it, firing it, this would be my preferred firing grip. And then when I go to load a round, push that forward, just pop this hand up and rotate, and then you'll lock into place. Show you how that would look on this side. Push it forward, rotate it, and you're in place. Now, what I would, and the reason why I suggest doing it that way and pushing it if it's your left hand in this direction, two reasons. First is that it's much easier to pop this hand up so that it comes up and it doesn't get caught. It's one of the things, and when I checked this out at SHOT Show, one of the things I was concerned about was getting my fingers pinched in here. Because if you keep your fingers in there and you rotate it over, you will pinch your fingers in there. Obviously, you can just rotate it back, get your fingers out. It's not the end of the world. But if you're doing it quickly, just pop those fingers straight up toward the sky and rotate it over. You won't have any problems. You notice I'm doing it with gloves. It's easy to do with your hands, whatever else. These are textured on here pretty well. I haven't had any slippage or issues with that. The other reason why I would suggest rotating it out in a way, not just because it's from a mechanic standpoint, it seems to be consistent and do well in that regard, but also since it's your support hand, you're rotating what would be presumably, if you shot the tube empty, an empty tube into this side. Your support hand's over here, and you can start thumbing rounds into it while you still have two loaded tubes in there, so you can top yourself off as you move. Obviously, you can rotate this with this hand in either direction. You can go both ways. It doesn't really matter. you know, from a mechanical standpoint, from a efficacy standpoint, as far as mechanics, movement, stuff like that, conserving movements and simplicity, that's what I would recommend in there. So let's start back up at the front. You have a threaded barrel on the end here. You can actually remove this threaded cap and slide the this M-lock rail completely off. That's pretty nice to see that that's easy to get on and off. I would bet you would see, this is a polymer rail up front here. I would bet someone is going to wind up making a metal rail for this at some point in the future. Stream this up, maybe some sort of adapter on the front here as well. I would not be surprised if you see some aftermarket support from this as this thing starts to take off, and you see some cooler designs up front. If you're not digging this front forearm design, I would be surprised if we didn't see that, so I would keep your eyes open for that. Inside here you can replace the chokes. It comes with 2 chokes, and a number 3 and number 4 choke, or at least as far as your dashes on there, which are Benelli Beretta style chokes, so that's nice. Comes with the tool to remove it as well, so you can drop any Beretta or Benelli style chokes in there. It's cool to have that kind of compatibility, because those are pretty much the most common ones out there, and if you're into shotguns, you probably have 1 or 2 of those laying around already. Keep in mind, you know, obviously you're shooting higher velocity rounds in here. You probably want to shoot slugs through here. Keep in mind, you know, improved cylinder are going to be recommended for slugs, and you know, you're not going to, in some of those tighter chokes, you're not going to want to run slugs through there because you wind up damaging your gun, whatnot. Check those different things out before you start running slugs with various chokes. Make sure you are doing that appropriately. That way you're not damaging your gun. So if you're not really into that sort of thing, I won't cover that. There's a lot of other good videos people have done on chokes and things like that. So we'll leave that to the ones that are already out there. So speaking of your barrel, you have an 18.5-inch smoothbore barrel up front here. It's 40-41. I did mention that it was 9 pounds. So not a light gun, not a heavy gun either necessarily. I find that a little bit of extra weight there. It is balanced pretty well. So it does keep your balance in your hand pretty well here, and a little bit of extra weight does help mitigate, and it being semi-automatic also helps mitigate some of the recoil on those heavier shells. And your overall length in this is going to be about 28.25 inches. So let's talk a little bit about ammunition. The minimum FPS that's recommended in the manual is 1200 FPS. The recommended is at least 1250 feet per second. So IWI says that for the lighter loads, they say there's a little bit of a break-in period. Thus far, out of roughly about 100 7.5 shot, the bird shot, 12 gauge bird shot that we put through here, we've had 2 failures to feed actually. So what happened was they short stroked. Basically, the bolt came back. It was just enough to kick the shell out, but it didn't move quite far enough back to get another round in, and that was in the first 2 boxes out of the 4 boxes for a total of 100 rounds. Last 2 boxes, we did not see any issues. 1 out of the first box, 1 out of the second box. On the 7.5 bird shot. So those are obviously pretty light loads out of here. And as far as with we ran number 6 shot, we ran number 4 shot, and obviously buckshot, double-aught buck, single-aught buck, and some various slugs, and there were 0 malfunctions in anything that was heavier than 7.5. So that was pretty cool to see. 100% reliability on anything that you would use for self-defense or hunting anything that wasn't a bird, a small bird anyway, or clay pigeons. And then those 2 in the very beginning stages as we were going through this. And we also used this to shoot some clay pigeons as well, and that was actually pretty fun. So speaking of zeroing this, keep in mind, because this is a bullpup style gun, especially you're going to put a red dot on here, you want that slightly higher height so you have what's going to be familiar to you for like an AR style height. This is an AR height mount that I have on here. Speaking of which, this is the Nikon P Tactical Super Dot. There will be a video coming out on this. You've seen it in a couple other guns already. This is the final gun for the testing that we've had it on. So that video will drop about a week after this video. Anyway, they're suggesting that you zero this probably at 50 yards, which will give you, and obviously keep in mind your height over bore here, right? You've got a decent amount of height over bore. That's the same thing on any type of bullpup, and especially with this 12 gauge here, keep that in mind. Zero with slugs at 50 yards, and you should be good at engaging basically from 0 to 100. and staying basically where you want to be. Now there's a whole lot that goes involved with that. We're not going to get into the mechanics and the ballistics of the 12 gauge shell and round, but anyway, we'll cover that in another video. I don't want to get too far off topic here because I want to stay on topic here because we do have a lot to cover here in this first video. And warranty-wise, IWI has a 5-year warranty on these. Man, it has been a cold, wet, nasty weekend here. Anyway, just a little bit of the functioning here real quick so you can see what I was talking about. This button here you can push to release a shell at a time. Push it, it'll get caught on this one right here, which is nice so that you can take each round out individually. What we've got here is some Fiocchi double-aught buck. This is their high-velocity nickel-plated. And we've only got 2 rounds in 2 of these tubes. This first tube is empty. We'll cycle through it, but I wanted to show you how it does. And also, actually, before we do that, I want to change the gas setting here. So technically, you're supposed to run the 3-inch shells on the, at least basically from what I gather from the manual, you're supposed to run those on the high setting or the heavy setting, and then on the L, the lower setting, you can run your 2 3/4 inch shells. Well, what I've found is these things cycle and run fine. The heavier 2 3/4 loads, they run fine on the higher setting. So that's what I just did right there. Popped it out, moved the pin back in. You don't have to. You can still run them in the low setting, all the 2 3/4. That's fine. But at least from everything that I gather. But why not drop that recoil down if you can? Anyway, in any event, there we go. I mentioned earlier you can drop shells directly in the chamber if you want. Boop, hit it, send your bolt home, and you are ready to go. Safety is right here. It's cross bolt safety. So push it. It's off. It's on. Easily manipulated by your hand here, whether you're right or left-handed. Let's run this. All right, so like I said, I put 1 round in there. I went to fire another one, whatever. Push your index finger forward, release, fingers to the sky, rotate over. You notice it sends the bolt home automatically. Did I only put 1 round in that one too? I guess I did. All right, so I guess we got 3 in the last one. Finger forward, fingers to the sky, rotate over, drops it home. There we go. So that was on the higher setting, and as you can tell, did drop the recoil down just a little bit. Those are the higher velocity defense rounds there from Fiocchi. Seem to run pretty well. We've run Federal, we've run sorry, my lips are getting cold from being out here. This early in the year, my body still has not adapted to the drastic quick weather change we just experienced here. Anyway, Federal, ton of Federal, Winchester, Fiocchi, S&B as well. Something to point out on the S&B slugs that we ran through here. The S&B slugs, not their slugs, but they're buckshot actually. They're high velocity 2 3/4 inch shells. They're just a little oversized. They're 2.5, maybe 3 millimeters longer, and that actually stacks up in this tube, so you can only put 4 of the S&B rounds in there, which kind of sucks. So something to keep in mind. I would probably, if you're going to be using this for self-defense, I would avoid those Fiocchi ones because you're only going to get 4, or not Fiocchi, I would avoid those S&B rounds because you're only going to get 4 rounds in there. At that point, if you're going with 4 rounds, why not step up to 3-inch shells instead? Otherwise, yeah, that's where we are. Thanks for watching us out here today. We really appreciate it. We're gonna have more follow-up on this and more things on this coming up in the future. You'll see this shotgun again, and you'll see you know, more shooting and whatnot in the next video on this with the Nikon P Tactical Super Tot that's on here. Sorry, man, my lips are just not cooperating today. It may not look like it, but it's freaking cold out here today. Anyway, thanks again, everybody. Facebook.com/gun reviews. You can also find us on Instagram. We are at 13C Gun Reviews. www.13cgunreviews.com, 13c.us. If you are doing any gaming for our Patreon supporters, if you follow us over there, we'll stream some of those. We're doing some streaming now on Twitch as well, but for some of the gaming that we're going to start doing. If you're on Fortnite, our Epic Creator Code is 13C Guns, 13C Guns. And for our Patreon supporters, we'll be doing streams and joining up and teaming up with you guys, helping give you guys a little bit of advice. I'm not the best, but at the same time, it's a cool way for us to interact and play together in private matches and stuff like that. So pretty cool. Play public matches as well, obviously. It's a good way to hang out and connect with subscribers. And definitely check us out over there if you haven't already. Sign up for the newsletter. We'll be doing more giveaways as the holidays come up via the newsletter. It's administered through MailChimp, so if you're not signed up, check the links down below. And it's open to anybody, whether you're following us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Full 30, Gunstreamer. Speaking of which, Full 30 and Gunstreamer, definitely follow us over there if you don't support those smaller platforms, as opposed to YouTube, which is doing everything they can at this point to nudge us out the door. We'll be here as long as we can, trying to spread the good word of fun, law-abiding citizens out here enjoying our right to keep and bear arms. Take care, stay safe. We'll talk soon. So we've been rotating through a number of different shells, high and low brass, different manufacturers and stuff. For the lower end stuff, the low brass stuff, 7.5 birdshot, the Federal so far has been doing the best. So anyway, let's run some of that through here real quick. We'll throw a couple plays for you before the sun goes down and mist, drizzle, rain, nastiness starts back up. Here we go. Man, that's fun. Winged it the first time, hit it the second time. Man, I'm telling you, if you have never shot clays with a red dot, it is really fun. You got to give it a try. So let's talk a little bit more about the ammunition. Your ammunition minimum that's in the manual that ships with this